Hey guys, this is going to be the first video in a series of videos where I'm going to talk about the use of water-based finishes for finishing your guitars. Now, water-based finishes have been around for a while, but in the early years, we're talking, 10, 15, 20 years ago, water-based finishes had a lot of promise, but there were some disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages that I think kind of held back the use of water-based finishes was the long dry time or cure time and their durability. They didn't have quite the scratch and ding resistance that we've come to expect from finishes like nitrocellulose lacquer and, more importantly, 2K polyurethanes and polyester finishes. So water-based was kind of being held back by those limitations. But what was really promising about them was the fact that they are safe to use, they're not flammable, and in many cases they are very low in toxicity. So they're safe for human exposure. However, it's taken a number of years for the chemistry to finally get to a point where we have products that are really giving the 2K polyurethanes and the polyesters a run for their money. So I thought I would do a series where I'm going to cover all the different products that are available, the water-based products. And I'm going to start out by talking about applying color to the wood. And for this particular video, I'm going to be talking about dyes, because dyes are a popular way to apply color to the wood. Now, of course, when you're using dyes, the result is going to be a transparent color finish. You're going to be able to see the wood grain coming through the color. And that's desirable if we want to accentuate the wood grain or whatever figure might be present in the wood. So what kind of product should you use or should you consider? Well, there are a huge variety of water-based dye stain products out on the market. If you do a Google search for them on the internet, you'll find that there's just an incredible variety. I've tried a lot of them, and the two that I keep coming back to as being the most effective are Keta-aniline dyes as well as TransTint, which is a metallized acid dye. And I find that these products produce the most intense color and the most consistent color. They're very easy to use. Now, you're probably wondering, well, which one should I use? Should I use the Keta dye or should I use the TransTint dye? Well, Keta dye is really great because it's very affordable. For under 20 bucks, you can get a kit which contains 5 different colors of dye. You've got your primary colors, which are blue, red, and yellow. And then they throw in brown and black. Now these are powdered dyes. They're meant to be mixed into a substrate, and that substrate is typically going to be hot water. So you would take, for example, a cup of hot water and then add in just enough dye to achieve the intensity that you want. And of course, you're going to need to test on some scrap wood to see what that intensity is as you're mixing it up. Now, one of the disadvantages of using dyes mixed in with water is that when you apply it to the wood, as it dries and the water evaporates, the fibers on the surface of the wood are going to curl up and they're going to dry that way. And the result is a very rough textured surface. That's called raising the grain. One way to avoid that is to mix the dye into alcohol. Now, what you should use is either denatured alcohol or 99% pure isopropyl alcohol. Both work about the same. However, you don't want to go lower than that in purity because then there's water in the alcohol which will cause the grain to raise. So you want to make sure that you have either that 99% pure isopropyl alcohol or the denatured alcohol, which doesn't have any water in it. The disadvantage, though, of using the aniline dyes is that they aren't light fast, which means exposure to sunlight is going to cause them to fade over time. Now, there are ways to avoid that, And I'll talk about that in a future episode. It has to do with certain types of clear coats that you can apply over the top of it to protect it from fading in sunlight. But that's where the trans-tint dyes come into play. Trans-tint dyes are light fast. They won't fade when exposed to sunlight. And like the Keta dyes, you can mix them into water or into alcohol. And of course, with the water, it's going to raise the grain. With the alcohol, it won't raise the grain. So I prefer to use the alcohol, even though it does bring the issue of flammability into the situation. So you have to be aware of that. Alcohol is flammable. The water isn't. But alcohol won't raise the grain, whereas the water will. And when you've got raised grain in your finish, that requires certain techniques to deal with it before you start to apply your clear coats. And again, that's something I'll talk about in a future episode as I get into more detail about some of these water-based finishes. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this video, you can show your support by clicking the thumbs up button down below. It's free to do. You can also click the subscribe button, which is also free. And when you do that, you can click the bell for notifications. That way you'll never miss any future content. But if you want to take your support to the next level, you can click the thanks button and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. Or you can click the join button or the subscribe plus button and become a member of my channel. And as a member, you're going to be able to enjoy videos just like the one you're watching, but with much more detail and best of all, no ads. Now let's get back to the video. But I really do like the trans-tint dyes for their intensity, but they are quite a bit more expensive than the Keta dyes. So if you're looking to save some money, I would recommend the Keta dyes. Just be aware that you'll have to take an extra step to protect them from fading in the sun. And with the trans-tint dyes, it's going to cost you quite a bit more money. However, they work quite well, and both of them work really well as far as producing really intense, strong dyes. Now, of course, when you use these, I highly recommend that you test on scrap wood to see what the intensity is going to be. And especially the first time you've ever used the product, you're not going to know for sure how much to add. And I can't really give you a ratio. I can't tell you how many parts of dye to water or alcohol to mix it up to get a good, strong, intense dye, because it really depends on the results you're hoping to achieve. And that's really what the determining factor. So you need to be able to test on scrap. Now, if you're building a guitar from scratch, I would recommend that any wood that you cut away as you're cutting out your guitar body, you save and use that to test your finish on. Otherwise, if you're building like a kit guitar, what you can do is you can go online, like to eBay, you might even be able to find it on Amazon as well, or do a Google search for scrap wood cutoffs and look for scrap wood cutoffs that are the same species as the wood that you made your guitar out of. It's not going to be an exact test situation, because really you need to be testing with the wood that the guitar was actually made out of. But if you're unable to do that, if you're building a kit guitar, you can always get those scrap cutoffs and use those to test your finish to see if you've got the right intensity, and then you can adjust from there to get what you're hoping to achieve. Now, once you've got these products mixed up to the intensity that you think is going to look the best, the way you apply them is fairly straightforward. You're going to want to wear nitrile gloves, because these stains will stain your fingers, and that dye will stay in your fingers for a fairly significant amount of time. So if you don't want to have to explain why your fingers are so red or purple or whatever, you're going to want to wear the nitrile gloves. And then applying them is simply just a matter of squirting some of the dye into a cotton ball and then applying it by rubbing it onto the surface. Very simple. One thing I would recommend though is when you apply it, you want to work pretty quickly and apply it over the entire surface. You don't want to apply a little bit and then get distracted by something and let it dry, because when you go to finish, you're going to notice a line of demarcation between where the dye dried and where the fresh dye was applied. And that can be hard to get rid of. It can take a lot of really hard rubbing. So you want to try to cover the entire surface. And one of the cool things with these dyes is you can come up with really nice effects, like I've got this top in blue and then the back in this red-brown color. Now I'm going to explain in detail the process for doing that, because it's not just a simple matter of carefully applying the dye. You've got to do masking and sealing and all kinds of other stuff. But I'll talk about that in a future episode in this series. So it's pretty easy to apply. It dries very quickly, especially if you're using the alcohol. It will evaporate very, very quickly. If you're using water, what you can do is give it about an hour to dry and then carefully touch in an area where you probably aren't going to see it. And if it feels cold to the touch, that means the water's still present. You want it to feel dry and basically the ambient temperature of the room that you're working in. There should be no fumes, no odors with these products at all, unless of course you're using alcohol. Alcohol of course has some odor. So if you're using the alcohol as the basis for your dye, I would recommend working in a well-ventilated area. Make sure there's no open flame. Don't be smoking a cigarette while you're applying it, or you're going to burn yourself up. And just be aware that with the water, there's no issues with the fumes, but with if you mix it with alcohol, there will be a little bit of an odor there. In the next episode in this series, I'm going to talk about another way to apply color, and that is opaque color. Because there's a whole different set of products that you can use that are all water-based that you can use to paint your guitar a solid opaque color. And we're talking about just about any sort of color you could ever imagine. And it's the sort of thing where if the color doesn't exist out of the can on the shelf, you can mix it to create whatever tint you want to. But I encourage you to check out that episode if you're interested in doing solid opaque colors. But in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this episode and got anything out of it, I would really appreciate it if you would stop what you're doing right now and click that thumbs up button. I can wait. It'll only take you a second. It's not going to cost you anything, but it's also going to improve your overall experience here on YouTube, because when you click that thumbs up button, YouTube knows you like this video and is going to serve up other similar videos just like it. And until the next episode, as always, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more of these guitar building videos.